A 3-year-old girl with 9 nails hammered into her skull. That's the horrific reality we're diving into today. Imagine a man known for showing kindness to children, turning out to be the one behind such unimaginable brutality. This case didn't just shock the world, it shattered the trust of every parent who's ever left their child with someone they thought they knew. In today's video, we're uncovering the chilling story of how a stepfather became the face of pure evil, and what happened next will leave you questioning everything. Stay with us to hear the full story, because the truth behind this tragedy is more terrifying than you think. On a cold winter evening, January 17th, 2022, the silence of a small village was broken by an urgent call. The local police department received a heart-wrenching report from the hospital. The report stated that a 3-year-old girl had arrived in critical condition. But what were the actual reasons behind that girl's severe condition, which made doctors urgently call the police? Was it a police case, or were the doctors exaggerating the situation? Well, to everyone's astonishment, the doctors were shocked to find 9 nails embedded deep into the toddler's skull. 9 nails are no joke. Chills just run down my spine when I wonder about that little baby and how helpless she would have been at that time. Moreover, the scene that followed this whole event shattered everyone's hearts and left everyone, including the doctors, wondering how such evil could be done to such a tiny, innocent soul. When the mother found her kid unconscious and shaking, she was shocked and hurriedly rushed to the hospital's emergency room. Her mother, who was pale and trembling, had brought her here, expecting against hope for a miracle. Before going to the hospital, the woman tried to wake her little girl, but nothing worked. Hence, fear took over, and the panic in her eyes was impossible to ignore, as it was beyond imaginable. Also, it was not the first time tragedy knocked at their door, especially for the 3-year-old. On the other hand, the doctors quickly took x-rays, and the discovery of 9 nails inside her tiny head was horrifying enough to call the police immediately. Something was deeply wrong. It wasn't any incident, but an attempted murder case. Within a bit, the hospital staff pulled up the girl's medical history and found something fishy. Just 3 months earlier, she had been treated for pesticide poisoning. Moreover, 2 months after that, she was back in the hospital again, this time with a foreign object lodged in her digestive tract. But how? All the questions lead to a simple answer. Someone was not happy with the presence of this little girl. After all the reports, the doctors could easily say that her little body had seen more trauma than most could bear. And now this? It became clear this was no mishap. The girl's diagnosis was grim, and the doctors were already losing hope. With every passing moment, the Grim Reaper was stepping towards her. Keeping in mind her state, she was transferred to a bigger hospital in a desperate attempt to save her. But everyone knew the odds were against her. The small hospital couldn't handle the severity of her condition, and time was running out. On the contrary, the police had been notified, and an investigation was launched. Furthermore, everyone needed answers, fast. At first glance, the police knew something terrible was happening behind closed doors. So, they started with an area known for its woodworking. This led investigators to suspect that the nails might have come from a nail gun often used by carpenters. But who would commit such an act of cruelty? As the investigation pressed on, the truth was revealed, a truth more monstrous than anyone could have imagined. The little soul tried its best to fight for her life. Nonetheless, just days later, the heartbreaking news swept through the media and caused a hustle and bustle. The little girl had passed away after 2 long months in the hospital, leaving her grieving mother behind. Consequently, the country, especially the human rights organizations, burst with grief, anger, and a cry for justice. In addition, people across the nation couldn't hold back their tears, mourning the life of a little girl who never had the chance to grow up and play with her friends. Everyone just demanded answers, and more than anything, they demanded punishment for the one responsible and guilty of this tyranny. So, who could do this? Who could be so heartless as to hammer nails into the skull of an innocent 3-year-old child? The truth couldn't die for long and came out soon enough. Therefore, after completing all their investigations, on January 20th, 2022, the police arrested Nguyen Trung Huyen, a 30-year-old carpenter, and he was charged with murder. Well, people who were labeling this tragedy to be an incident must assure that it wasn't a moment of madness or insanity, but this was pre-planned, cold-blooded cruelty. Now you must wonder what problem the carpenter had with this toddler. Did jealousy or other factors make him do this evil act? On top of all that, what relation did Huyen share with this little girl? When the proper inquiries took place, the police found out that Huyen had lived with the girl's mother, Ms. Nguyen Thi Luyen, and from the start, he viewed the little girl as nothing but an obstacle. When they dig deeper, the chains start to meet, because Huyen doesn't want to be responsible for raising the child. He wanted an easy life, free from the girl's presence. And then, in his twisted mind, this innocent child stood in his way, and he decided to get rid of her in the most brutal ways possible. Also, you need to remember that this wasn't the first time he had harmed her either. In mid-September 2021, Huyen stole dry glue powder from his carpentry workshop because he had a sick plan in mind. While the girl's mother was at work, he poured the glue into the child's nostrils, watching her struggle to breathe. He stopped only when she began to choke. Thus, a few days later, when the child's breathing didn't improve, her mother took her to the hospital, where doctors found foreign objects in her nose. Still, they didn't know the full extent of the cruelty that had been inflicted upon her, since this was only the beginning. A month later, Huyen tried to kill the little girl again. However, this time, it was not the glue. He mixed herbicide poison into the child's water. Luckily, the mother got her to the hospital in time, and she survived. But Huyen wasn't done. In November 2021, he forced the child to swallow screws, hoping to kill her. Again, by some miracle, the girl survived. But how many more times could she escape death? His malice didn't stop there. On Christmas Eve 2021, after a night of drinking, Huyen returned home to find the little girl sitting in a chair. Furious that she hadn't gone to bed when told, he began to beat her, breaking her arm. At just 3 years old, her body was already broken, her spirit crushed, and yet the worst was to come. On January 17, 2022, Huyen struck for the final time. Angry that the child didn't respond to him when he spoke, he slapped her repeatedly. However, he felt that wasn't enough, so Huyen grabbed a dumbbell and hammered 9 nails into her skull. Afterwards, he calmly took her to the babysitter as if nothing had happened. Later that day, the child collapsed and was rushed to the hospital in a coma. She was convulsing, her body shutting down. It was there, in the emergency room, that the doctors discovered the nails. 9 of them were driven deep into her skull, and it didn't seem like any accident. She was transferred to a larger hospital, where she fought for her life for 2 months. But the damage was too severe, and on March 12, 2022, she passed away. The investigation into Huyen's actions portrayed a picture of pure evil. This was no momentary lapse of judgment, because over months, Huyen had tortured this little girl, waiting for the day when he could finally rid himself of her. Each attack was more brutal than the last, each one a deliberate attempt to end her life. But what drove him to such unspeakable acts? Was he a monster born of hatred? Or was there something deeper, something more sinister at play? Huyen's arrest sent shockwaves throughout the community. This was a man who, on the outside, seemed ordinary. His social media accounts showed pictures of happy moments and posts about how to care for children. Moreover, he even advised keeping kids away from screens, warning of the dangers of too much screen time. How could someone so two-faced live among them? The contrast between his online persona and the horrifying reality was too much for people to comprehend. people only raise questions like, was Huyen mentally ill? Was he on drugs? But surprisingly, the authorities found no signs of any brain disorder or mental illness, nor was he under the influence of any substances. So, what drove him to such lengths? It seemed shockingly that this was all driven by hate, a hatred so deep and sick that it allowed him to take the life of an innocent child without a second thought. The court proceedings were swift, and the evidence against Huyen was overwhelming. He admitted to his crimes without hesitation, recounting every horrific detail with a chilling lack of remorse. Thus, the Hanoi People's Court gave him the death penalty on October 13, 2022. Even his death couldn't fulfill the damage which he had given to that girl, and why would anyone justify his act? Many people considered that the death penalty was a smaller punishment. For this guy, he should have burned in hell. On the other hand, the court's words were harsh but fitting, since they called his actions barbaric, saying he had used the most brutal means to end the life of a child who had barely begun to live, grow, or make new friends. The public outcry and anger were deafening, demanding swift justice, and in the end, they got it. But the story continued because some questions stayed behind. One of the most triggering questions was how a mother could know what was happening under her roof. How could she not have seen the signs? The court ruled that there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute her, but doubts fogged people's brains. People couldn't help but wonder if she had played a role, even if indirectly, in her daughter's suffering, because they knew that a mother could feel their child's pain more than anyone else. Subsequently, the investigation into her involvement continued, but something was still being determined. Hence, when the dust settled, one question hung heavy. Why? Why would someone commit such unspeakable acts against a defenseless child? Was it simply hatred? Or was there something more profound and grave? Now we are only left with a broken heart and a haunting question. How many other children are suffering in silence, their cries unheard, and their pain unseen? And most importantly, how can we stop this from happening again? This story may be over, but the fight for justice and innocent protection continues. If you find my story interesting, subscribe to my channel and leave a comment in the comment section. Thank you, and see you in the next story.